doing static in a dynamic world with Hasura and Nuxt.js. So my name is Debbie O'Brien. I'm Head of Learning and Developer Advocate at Nuxt.js. I'm a writer for Ultimate Courses and a teacher at ViewSchool, and I'm a Google Developer Expert, Media Developer Expert for Cloudinary, and a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. And you can follow me LinkedIn, Debbie O'Brien, or Twitter, Debs_O'Brien. So, oh, and this picture, by the way, is actually in January when the world was normal and we went to Antarctica. And this is from the cruise ship in Antarctica where I gave my talk. And little did I know that I was in the vast remoteness then, and that was like my preparation for the world to come. Okay, so what I will cover. So a little bit about Nuxt.js, if you haven't heard of it. How static sites work. I hope you all love static sites. If not, you will by the end of this talk. A little bit about Hasura and GraphQL. Build hooks and triggers with Netlify deployment. And the Nuxt.js full static. Now I know you're kind of thinking, wow, that's a hell of a lot to take in, but bear with me, it will all be good. I will make it fun, don't worry. Okay, so Nuxt, for those of you that don't know about Nuxt, so Nuxt is the intuitive view framework. So basically you're writing Vue code, but you're using Nuxt. It's like a meta framework on top of Vue. So you still write Vue, but you're able to do so much more. Nuxt gives you so many benefits. For example, you get file-based routing. What does that mean? It means you create a Vue file and you put it in a pages folder, and then automatically a router.js file will be created for you. Then you don't have to maintain that file. You don't have to add anything to that file. It's just automatic. And you also get automatic code splitting of those routes. What that means is when you go to the next page, the JavaScript of that page is not going to be loaded until you go to that page, right? So it's code splitting all the JavaScript for that particular page, and that's done automatically for you. It also gives you prefetching, so it's going to prefetch those pages ahead of time. Obviously, once you're not on 3G network, you're on a faster network, you're going to have all those pages prefetched. So when you go to that, it's like super lightning fast to be able to get everything you need. And we have automatic component imports. So if you've ever written code before and import the footer from the footer.js, and then you have to put components and you put the footer, and that's just extra code. It takes up space, takes up time. In Nuxt, we like to make things quick, fast, and easy. So this is now automatic as of the last update. So basically you just put the component in your Vue template and it's automatically imported for you when it's needed, right? It's not put in every page, only when it's used. And we have more than 100 modules. So we got a module for a progressive web app, for sitemap, for Google Analytics, for Storybook, for Storyblock, for any Prismic CMS, any kind of, for everything. There's more than 100. I think there's about 134 and we haven't counted them all. So much you can do with Nuxt.js to get you up and started and running, and so that you can create web applications super fast. Now, with Nuxt you can build server-side render applications, and that's when it started, right? So Nuxt started because Vue was out and people wanted, Vue was cool, so we want to use Vue, but we need to have server-side rendering, and it was kind of a hassle to get the server-side rendering with Vue working. So Nuxt created an easy way to do that, and that's its main focus, was server-side rendering. But obviously you can still build a single page application with Nuxt. You just change the mode and then basically you have a single page application. You can also create a progressive web app. So it's really, really simple. In about 3 steps, you've got a progressive web app up and running. And you can also create static sites. Now recently, static sites, otherwise known as the Jamstack, has been very, very big. And you might have heard a lot of talk about this Jamstack. You're like, what's going on with this Jamstack? I know the mean stack, I know the lamp stack, but what's the Jamstack, right? So Jamstack is your static sites. And Nuxt has a static site generator built in. So it's not just a static site generator, because it also can do server-side rendering, single page applications, and progressive web apps. And it's really easy to change from one to the other. So just a small configuration, and you can change a server-side render application into a static site. So that's kind of cool. Now, you're all kind of thinking, static sites, yeah, it sounds a bit boring, right? And you're probably thinking, this is what a static site is. Now, this is the most iconic static site of all time, right? This was built in 1994, I think it was, or 1996. 1996. And so it's about 24 years. It's still live. So you can go to that site right now. It's still live. It is still fully functionally and still working. Remember, I started web design actually in 1996. And yeah, basically this was as good as it got, right? This was amazing. This is using every technique possible under the sun, and they've used it. And if you click on any of those planets, there's a hell of a lot going on inside it. It's really interactive. It's really, really cool. But obviously this is just static site in the sense of it's just HTML, a little bit of JavaScript, and very little CSS, because we didn't have so much CSS back then. So people think static sites, they think like Space Jam, content that isn't going to change and hasn't changed in 24 years. And, that's the kind of misinterpretation of what static sites are. And that's not what static sites are. And that's what I'm going to show you. But first of all, why should you think static, right? You've got your server-side rendered applications. They work. They're great. So why would I change from that to go static? So remember, going static is no server, right? It's serverless. So basically, it's cheaper and safer. You don't have to worry about attack vectors. You don't have to worry about like having that server and maintaining it. You don't need a server. It's a static site. You can put things in a CDN and it just gets delivered. And therefore, that makes it much quicker, right? You have better offline support because you don't have to go to the server to get that page rendered on the server to be sent back to the client. It's there. It's already rendered. It's already ready. Just like Space Jam, it's already ready. It's in a CDN. It just has to come down and be shown on the client. And that obviously gives better performance. And performance is key, especially nowadays. We're all like, living at home. Not everyone has great internet connection. We're using so much internet all day, every day, because we normally used to use the work Wi-Fi, and then we're back, we're using your own, right? So performance is really, really key, and especially as the whole world, everything we're doing online. So, if your website's not fast enough, I'm just going to be gone and I'm going to go somewhere else. So it's really important to keep performance in mind. And of course, it reduces the carbon footprint. And you're going to go, really? What? Yeah, because remember, no server, right? So because of no server, it's basically, you're reducing your carbon footprint. And, we've seen how 2 months of stopping the world has just made the world a better place. And environmental wise, I mean, I know I live in Mallorca in Spain, and any of you who know Arenal Beach, for example, Magaluf Beach, like the waters are crystal clear. Like the first time ever in 21 years I've been living here, I have seen crystal clear waters in Arenal and Magaluf in the summer, in plain summer. And that's because of, reducing our carbon footprint by not having airplanes and stuff. So basically, we can do the same with our websites. Remove your WordPress websites off those servers and, build Nuxt.js static sites instead, for example. So with Nuxt full static, what do you get with full static? So you don't have to expose your API to the public. So, if you're having another application, you look in the network tab, you can see everything from your API. So with full static, you don't see the API call at all. And you can decide when to publish new content from your API. So you're regenerating your site every time you want new content. So you're in control of everything. Kind of like if you think about the WordPress days, right? Until you press publish, you're not going to actually get that live. So it's kind of the similar way of thinking. And fully static is much faster, right? Obviously, API calls have some latency. It always takes a little bit longer. And full static, it's much faster, and fast is good. And what we do is we cache the payload files. So it's much better for offline support. So basically at build time, it's going up, it's getting those API calls, it's bringing them down, it's saving them in a cached folder. And then on client-side navigation, you're basically going to that folder to get those API calls. If any of you ever worked with Nuxt in the past, you might remember how it wasn't full static, it was kind of half static in a way. So it used to call the API on every page change, right? So that changed in the latest version, released about 2 months ago, and now it's like full static. So that's kind of really, really cool. So in order to use full static, you just update to the latest version of Nuxt and you write target static in your Nuxt config. Simple as that, target static in the Nuxt config, and then you're going to use the generate command instead of the build command when you're doing your deployment. That is it. That's all you need to do. If you have a server-side rendered application, you want to move to a full static site, you just add target static to your Nuxt config and change your build command. Simple. So let me show you a little bit about how it works. So we've got our code in GitHub, for example, and we've got it set up so that on every push, we're going to get a new deploy. Okay, so literally I create my application, I change some code, and I push it. Now I'm using Netlify in this example, but you could use Azure Static Web Apps, you could use Vercel, you could use GitHub Pages, or any other kind of free hosting service where you don't have to pay any money, because I like not having to pay money. So basically I'm using Netlify here, but you can use any of the others. So what Netlify is going to do is it's going to say, right, you have a Nuxt application and you've asked me to do the Nuxt generate. That would be like running npm run generate, right, or yarn generate. So the generate command is then going to say, okay, I'm going to take all those view files, I'm going to run it through Webpack, and I'm going to just translate them all into static HTML files. So you're going to get your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript files, just like you would the Space Jam site from many years ago. It's the separate HTML site that's going to call the JavaScript and call the CSS. And you basically get that fantastic page that I created called hello, right? Simple as that. And that's basically how it works, right? Easy and kind of cool, right? We got it so far, and I'm looking for nods. Are we all still here? Yeah? Okay, great. So Michael is saying, what about data, right? So, we want a bit of data going on here. We want to see, data coming from a database. We don't want to be writing all our HTML and all our data in one place and all our, text, etc. And you're right, Michael, you're right. We can't build the static sites of the 90s. Again, we need to make things better. So what are we going to do? So I have a website, for example, where I put all my conferences, and it's hard for me to keep track of where I'm speaking. So I need to I need to put data in there, and it's changing all the time. As I keep adding new conferences, I'm constantly adding more data. So this data is coming from a database. It's not in my actual application. So what do I use as a database? You could use anything really, but what I'm using is Hasura. Anyone heard of Hasura? No? Yes? A couple of people? Okay, cool. I love Hasura. So Hasura is great for real-time GraphQL APIs, and I love GraphQL. And it's open source, and it connects your database and microservices, and it auto-generates a production-ready GraphQL backend. Now, what's really cool about it is I'm not a backend developer, so I can actually do backend stuff by being a front-end developer and not having to get a backend person to actually create, APIs for me. So this makes my life so much easier. So I absolutely love Hasura, and as well, it's free. Again, I like free things. So any of you who are familiar with PHP MyAdmin and back in the day will kind of know how it works, right? You have a UI and you basically add a table. So this is Hasura's UI. You basically go in here and you create your table and you add your column type, and you fill out everything that you want, your primary key, etc. So in this example, I've created a conference table and a workshops table. So then, as you know, at GraphQL, you get one endpoint. I love having one endpoint. I deal with one endpoint, whereas with REST, you would get an endpoint for the conferences, one for the workshops, one for something else. And it's a nightmare, and it's just you need a backend developer to help you out with all this stuff, right? So with this, I've got one endpoint, and that's all I need to connect my database to my application, right? Now, what Hasura gives you as well is a GraphQL playground. So you kind of saying, yeah, I don't know how to write GraphQL, so I'm not going to use Hasura because, I haven't learned GraphQL. Don't worry, because you got checkboxes. We all know how to check boxes. So this is what Hasura gives you. And you basically can see I've got a workshops table there in this example. And I created field names called alt, data, duration, ID, and I just basically checked them. And that basically what it's going to do is it's going to create a query for me. Now, you might not like checking boxes, and that's fine. You can actually just write the query yourself. That's also cool. But you might not remember what the field name is. So sometimes checking the boxes just makes it easier. But yeah, you can just write this yourself. So this is the query that you will then use in your code to basically get what you want to get, right? So in order to make sure that that's giving you the data you want to do, you press the big play button there at the top just beside the words GraphQL. Once you press the play button, you're going to get your data. So you're actually just going to get, this fantastic data. And you're going to look and say, oh, I didn't want the place, so I'll take the place out. Or I wanted to add this. So then you just modify the query, press play again, and there you go. You have it. So as simple as that, you've now just learned how to use GraphQL. You've learned how to use Hasura. You've created a table in seconds, right? Simple, right? So how do then I connect my Hasura with my Nuxt project, right? I've got my Nuxt project up and running. I now want to use Hasura. What do I do? So I'm going to show you an example that is actually not using View Apollo. So if any of you have heard of using, GraphQL, normally you're using View Apollo if you're in the View world. And Apollo is it's great. It's really, really good, but it's really big. It's a pretty hefty library. And if you're only just getting a little bit of data, you don't want to be adding a massive library onto your code. You can if you want, but I personally don't. So I'm going to show you an easier way and a lightweight way of adding Hasura to your Nuxt. So first, you just got to register the HTTP module so that you can make, those calls. And that's simple. You install it. And then in your Nuxt config, you just add that to the modules array. Simple as that. So I've now got my, my HTTP module set up. And then I'm going to create a plugin, right? So creating a plugin in Nuxt is really, really easy. And then it gives me access to be able to do whatever I want. Once I create that plugin, I can then use it across my application. So I'll just run through this very quickly. It's basically just exporting a function. I'm passing in the $HTTP module that I already installed and the env, which I get from Nuxt from the context. And I'm using the inject, right? This is something that comes from Nuxt. And inject means I can inject it into my code, right? And then I'm just calling it $Hasura. I could call this whatever I wanted. And I'm basically just creating it. I'm prefixing my API Hasura URL. This is my endpoint that I showed you in one of the previous slides, right? Here I'm using it as an API, as an end variable, but you could just manually put it in there if you wanted to, right? And then I'm basically injecting, so I'm using Nuxt possibility to inject Hasura, and basically just, posting and binding that Hasura that I created. So kind of looks a bit scary, but that's basically the only code you need. Once you have that set up, that's it. You can just call as many tables as you want. So, okay, you do have to register the plugin first. So in Nuxt, you have to actually go to the Nuxt config, and in the plugins array, just register that. Although from Nuxt 3, this will be automatic, so you're not even going to need this step, but still for the moment, you've got to do that. And then in your page, so your conference page, your workshop page, or whatever page you want to make that call, you're just going to import GQL from the GraphQL tag and print from the GraphQL language printer, so that you're able to use the GraphQL tag to be able to get your query into your code. Then you're adding your query, right? This is the query we created. I simplified it a little bit, but imagine you just copied what I showed you in the GraphQL playground and pasted it in here, const query, you could call that whatever you want. And then you're querying the conferences table. I'm ordering it by date, and then my field name, place, and date, right? So this is all I want back. And then you can actually just manually add this in here as well. If you wanted to modify it here, you don't have to go back to Hasura to modify that, right? You can modify it here or in Hasura and then recopy it and paste it. So then I'm going to use async data to be able to make that call to Nuxt and get that back. So using async data, I'm passing in the app into my context of Nuxt. And then I'm basically just saying, destructure data and wait for that Hasura plugin I created, and use GraphQL print to print out that query and return conferences being data.conferences, because that's my table name, right? And that's as simple as that. I now have returned back to me the data from my GraphQL endpoint. I have everything I want in the conferences table. Simple as that. So now to use it in your template, it's very, very simple. In my view template, I'm using a v4 here to kind of loop over all the conferences, and I'm basically just printing out the conference.name. So I'm getting my list of conferences. And that is it. That's as simple as that. That's yeah, I know you're all looking at me going, whoa, it's gone in one ear and out the other, right? And you're thinking, that was a lot to take in. And I know, yeah, you might want to have to go back over those slides and kind of check the code and stuff. But it really is as simple as that. And to get another table up and running, you're just adding a different table and that's it. So it's really, really, really simple. So let's go back to the deployment issue, right? So remember, we have our code in GitHub. We deployed to Netlify. We've just, added this new plugin and everything. And now we're going to Nuxt generate again. We need to generate our application, but this time, because we're using async data, before anything is generated, it's going to go and it's going to fetch that API. It's going to go to Hasura. It's going to say, give me that query that I just asked you for. And Hasura is going to go, okay, here you go. Here's the conference table. And it's going to return all that back. And then it's going to finish the generation of the page. And it's going to create those static HTMLs with the JavaScript, which now those that call to that workshop and that conference are now going to be in a payload JavaScript file in a static folder, ready to be called as JavaScript right there in the actual static files. So that's kind of simple, right? Yeah, easy. Now you're going to say, okay, what about data changing, right? I want to change my data because it's all cool getting the data from the database, but it's still kind of static sites here. And I want to change that data. I don't want it to be like 24 years, still the same data. And you're right, Michael, I know the new Space Jam film is meant to come out next year, and we want to keep updating things and making it more modern. So we want to change and generate some data. What do we do? So that's when we use event triggers. So luckily, Hasura has this all set up for you. So basically, you just click on the Events tab in Hasura, and you create a new event trigger, as simple as that. So basically, you put in the trigger names. You can call it whatever you want, like, Hasura or conferences trigger or whatever. And you choose the table. So I'm going to choose the conferences table or the workshop table. And then you basically say, what do you want it to do on insert, or on update, or on delete, or none of, or just one of them, or all of them. And then I need to add in a webhook URL. Okay, where do I get that from? What do I do with that? What's that? Okay, so the webhook URL, again, I'm using Netlify as an example. This would be different if you were using Azure Static Web Apps or Vercel or GitHub Pages. But in Netlify, you just go to the build hook section and you basically create a new build hook name. So I'm going to say deploy from Hasura, for example, or deploy conferences table or whatever. And then I just choose the branch. So I want to build to master, and I press save. Once I press that save button, it's going to give me this line of code, right? This API call, this build hook, this line, we just copy it. So this URL, we're basically just going to copy that from Netlify. Now, don't go copying this and trying to like, use up all my Netlify build minutes, because that's a fake one and it's not going to work, right? So I got you. I see you there all taking notes and copying it. Okay, so then I basically just take that and I put it into what I showed you earlier, that webhook URL. So I just paste that, put it in there, and now Netlify is connected to Hasura, and they're able to like basically just do cool stuff without you having to do anything. Great, so cool. So now in my table, I can just basically go, and you can see how the table is set up, right? It's really easy. There's little icons, and I can press the edit button or the delete button or the clone button, and I can just modify any of that data. So I'm in my Hasura API, and I'm basically just like modifying stuff here, and I'm pressing save. And as soon as I do that, so this is my Hasura application, I'm adding my data, pressing save, it's now going to trigger a deploy. So it's now going to go, oh, I've got this hook, it's going to go Netlify, something's changed in Hasura, can you like, sort this out and kind of, regenerate? And Netlify is going to go, okay, yeah, great. So yeah, I've got a Nuxt.js application here, and it's just called NuxtGenerate. And basically, I'm going to go and I'm going to fetch that API as before. It's going to return that data. Now it's got the new data. Now here's the cool thing. Basically, it's going to return the HTML, but it's clever enough that Generate knows that the application's already been built, right? The only thing I've changed is some data. I haven't changed any view files. I haven't changed any JavaScript, any CSS. I haven't like changed any images in folders or anything. So it's going to skip Webpack. It's going to say, well, you haven't done anything exciting, so I don't really need to generate much. So I'm just going to like skip Webpack and skip all that build because your application is still the same. And I'm just going to regenerate the content. And I'm just going to generate that, content that changed, which was like that, conference table, the Hasura table, that file that's in the payload.js. That's the only thing that you've changed. So that's the only thing I'm going to generate. So that means generation is really quick, right? Instead of waiting like 2 or 3 minutes for your application to build, it's now seconds, because it's like, yeah, Webpack, I don't need you because it's already done. So yeah, you get your static HTML files in seconds, and my awesome new title has been changed because you changed it from the Hasura, right? So that's kind of really, really, really cool. So yeah, the Nuxt static module. So this is the last release of Nuxt. It was about 2 months ago released. It's going to call the payload on the page change. So it's not calling the API every time you change the page. It's also got a crawler for dynamic pages. So if you remember, if you were using Nuxt before, you got dynamic pages like for blog posts, etc. You used to have to like write a big whole map over an array of all your dynamic pages. You don't have to do that anymore because there's a crawler that's going to crawl all those pages, and it's going to create all those dynamic static pages for you without you having to do anything. Unless you have a secret page with like some sort of admin secret and you can't get in, then obviously if you want that generated, you would have to like manually do that, right? But everything is going to be generated. And there's a live preview. So if you wanted to see what it was like before it's deployed, you can just add a very small plugin code into your application and then just put a query param of preview equals true. And now you can see it because now it's going to call it on the API, and you're going to see that call, you can see that data change, and then you can decide to build or not. As I said, the build is cached. So basically, yeah, this is like the most super exciting thing, that the build is cached. So you're only generating on content change, you're only generating the content. If you change a view file, if you change your architecture, then yes, it will have to rebuild the application, and it will know that you changed that file, and then it will run through Webpack, and it will take a little bit longer. But then that's cool because that's what you wanted, right? So yeah, it's like lightning fast, just like Michael. And that's what's really cool about static sites, is it's dynamic, it's fast, it's super cool. And I had a lot of fights in the past with all these back-end developers and stuff, and management who said, I don't want to generate my website, I don't want to have to wait minutes, 2 minutes, like come on, 2 minutes, seriously? It's not like a long time. And now it's even faster. So that's kind of like really cool. So why should you go static? So remember, there is no server needed, so it's cheaper and it's safer. And like when I say as well, no server needed, it means that you're like, there's always a server, right? So don't get me wrong. It's not like it's, when we say it's in the cloud and stuff, it's not like it's an actual physical cloud and, it's just magic, right? There is a server, but the thing is that you don't have to deal with that server. So Netlify or Azure Static Web Apps or whatever platform you're using is taking away all that thing that you don't have to deal with. And, me and Rafa used to work in a company that worked with deployments and servers, and we know all that setup and all that work that goes behind it. And like me and he knows, like, that I'm not a deployment person. This is like over my head. I can deploy sites so easily using these services. So no server means I don't have to worry about set up a server and deal with, server hacking and security and everything, because someone else that's cleverer than me is going to do all that for me. And I don't have to pay for it. Oh, brilliant. So yeah, you get better offline support. So that's great. Team a static site with a progressive web app. And now you've got like offline support, which you're probably saying, yeah, but we don't get on planes these days or trains. So what does that matter? But we do go in lifts and, you might lose a little bit of internet connection. So still good. So yeah, having better offline support is always good. Better performance, because remember, it's not going to a server to get everything. It's just going to a CDN, and CDNs are placed around the world. Whereas before you'd have to go like to Japan to that server, and it takes a little bit of time to go there and come back. So static sites are much faster, much more performant. And again, it reduces the carbon footprint. And that's really, really important, because we're not using servers, we're reducing our footprint. So basically, yeah, you got to think static, but you got to be dynamic. There is nothing static about Michael. There's nothing static about Space Jam at all. If you haven't seen the film, you should watch it. Watch the first one. The second one should be out next year because of COVID. It's kind of like, maybe not, who knows? But that's the way it is. They had a conversation with the original people who created the website, and they would love to come back and build the next version, Space Jam 2 website. I would love to see them also build it as a static site, kind of keeping the same good performance, the same cool site, but using Nuxt instead. That would be brilliant to see, like, from 1996 to 2020, and see like if they could build a static site just as good using Nuxt and have it even more dynamic. So that would be amazing. So yeah, my only question for you today is, are you Nuxt? I really hope you are. If you haven't checked out Nuxt, please do. It's a great framework to use. I personally love it. Reach out to me for anything you want. If you have any questions, my Twitter is always open, so just DM me. I've written some courses as well for View School, so you can check them out. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. And I'm here for questions if you have any.